Welcome to i-TUTOR IAS Academy's Biology NCERT series. Today we will be discussing Chapter 13 Organisms and Population. Our living world is fascinatingly diverse and amazingly complex. We can try to understand its complexity by investigating processes at various levels of biological organization, which include macromolecule level, cells, tissues, organs, individual organisms, populations, communities, and ecosystems and biomes. Ecology is a subject which studies the interaction among organisms and between organisms and its physical environment. So, ecology is a subject which studies the interaction. This is a keyword which is important. This is a definition of ecology. Ecology is basically concerned with 4 levels of biological organization, which include organisms, populations, communities, and biomes. Moving on to next topic, organism and its environment. Ecology at the organismic level is essentially physiological ecology, which tries to understand how different organisms are adapted to their environment in terms of not only their survival but also their reproduction. The rotation of our planet around the sun and the tilt of its axis cause annual variation in the intensity and duration of temperature. So there is variation in intensity as well as duration of temperature, which result in distinct seasons. And these variation in intensity and temperature causes distinct seasons. These variation together with the annual precipitation variation will account for the formation of major biomes such as desert. Here is a graph which shows biome distribution with respect to annual temperature and precipitation. This axis has the mean annual temperature and this axis shows mean annual precipitation. See desert. Desert is having a very high mean annual temperature while the precipitation level is quite low. Comparing it with tropical forest where it is having high mean annual temperature as well as mean annual precipitation. In contrast, comparing with alpine tundra and Arctic, the temperature as well as the precipitation is at a lower end, and grassland is at a middle range, and similarly coniferous forest and temperate forest. Now moving on to next portion. Regional and local variation within each biome lead to formation of wide variety of habitats. On planet Earth, life exists not just in few favorable habitats, but even in extreme and harsh habitats. Scorching Rajasthan desert, perpetually rain-soaked Meghalaya forest, deep ocean trenches, torrential streams, permafrost polar regions, high mountain tops, boiling thermal springs, and stinking compost pits, to name a few. Even our intestine is unique habitat for hundreds of species of microbes. Major biomes of India: tropical rainforest, deciduous forest, desert, and seacoast. Key elements that led to so much variation in the physical and chemical conditions of different habitats include temperature, water, light, and soil. These 4 conditions will be discussed separately in the following sessions. Physiochemical, that is abiotic components alone do not characterize the habitat of an organism completely. The habitat includes biotic components also, like pathogens, parasites, predators, and competitors of organisms which they exist, interact constantly. Let's discuss major abiotic factors. First one, temperature. Temperature is the most ecologically relevant environmental factor. Average temperature on land varies seasonally, decreases progressively from equator to poles and from plains to mountains. So it varies seasonally, first thing, and let this be Earth, and this is equator, and from equator to the poles the temperature progressively decreases. And similarly, in case of mountains also, the temperature progressively decreases as we move from the plains to the mountain tops. It ranges from sub-zero levels at the polar areas and high altitudes to greater than, this is 50 degrees Celsius, okay, 50 degrees Celsius to greater than 50 degrees Celsius in tropical deserts in summer. However, unique habitats such as thermal springs and deep sea hydrothermal vents where average temperature exceeds 100 degrees. This is degrees Celsius. This is not 1000. This is 100 degree Celsius. It is general knowledge that mango trees do not and cannot grow in temperate countries like Canada and Germany. Snow leopards are not found in Kerala forest, and tuna fish are rarely caught beyond tropical latitudes because it affects the kinetics of the enzymes and through it basal mechanism, activity and other physiological function of the organism. So the main reason is once the temperature, its optimum temperature or the habitat in the temperature at the habitat in which the organism lives is exceeded or decreased, it affects the kinetics of the enzymes, the various enzymes that is present in the body for various metabolic processes. So it affects the kinetic of the enzymes, and through it affects the basal mechanism, activity and other physiological function of the organism. So that is the reason why we see all these variations, like mango trees are not seen in Canada, the snow leopards are not found in the Kerala forest, and the tuna fish is rarely caught from the tropical latitudes. Now, a few organisms can tolerate and thrive in wide range of temperature. They are eurythermal organism. Okay, this is a very important term. Just take a note of it. And but vast majority of them are restricted to a narrow range of temperatures. Such organisms are called stenothermal. The level of thermal tolerance of different species determined to a large extent their geographical distribution. So there are two key terms that you have to remember here: eurythermal and stenothermal. Don't get confused between these two. Eurythermal are the organisms that can tolerate and thrive in wide range of temperature. Eurythermal, wide range, and the organisms which are restricted to narrow ranges, stenothermal. So these are opposite to each other. Now let's move to the second abiotic factor, water. Next to temperature, water is the most important factor influencing the life of organism. We know that life originated in water. The productivity and distribution of plants is also heavily dependent on water, and rivers should not face any water related problems. The productivity and distribution of plants is also heavily dependent on water. So you might think that the organisms living in oceans, lakes and rivers should not face any water related problems. But is that true? It's not. But it's not true. For aquatic organisms, the quality which consists of chemical composition, pH of water becomes very important. The salt concentration that is measured in salinity, parts per thousand is the unit, is less than 5% in inland waters, 30% in percent in the sea, and greater than 100% in some hypersaline lagoons. Some organisms are tolerant of wide variety of salinities. They are known as euryhaline, but others are restricted to narrow range of salinity. So these organisms are called stenohaline. These are very two important terms, as I mentioned in case of eurythermal, stenothermal. The same here, same thing applies to here, euryhaline and stenohaline. These two terms are very important key terms. Just keep a note of it. So euryhaline are the organisms that are tolerant of wide range of salinities, while stenohaline are organisms that are restricted to narrow range of salinities. Many freshwater animals cannot live for long in seawater and vice versa because of the osmotic problems. So this is all about the first two abiotic factors. First one is temperature and second one is water. Moving on to the next, the third one, light. So the third one is light. So, since plants produce food through photosynthesis, a process which is only possible when sunlight is available as source of energy. We know photosynthesis is only possible in the presence of the sunlight. Many species of plants like herbs and shrubs growing in forests are adapted to photosynthesize at optimally at low light conditions because they are constantly overshadowed by tall canopied trees. Many plants are also dependent on sunlight to meet their photoperiodic requirement of flowering. So these are all the ways in which light is a very important factor when it comes to the photosynthesis. So like on the forest, there are so many big trees, as a result of which the small shrubs and herbs that is growing here will get only very little sunlight from the they will get only very little. This is sun. Okay, oh my god, my sun looks like, okay, it's sun. I'll write it sun. Okay, so it will have only very little sunlight that will filter to the canopy. So these shrubs and herbs can optimally photosynthesize at low light conditions. Similarly, for the flowering also, a photoperiodic requirement is met with the sunlight. Many animals too, for the animals also, the light is very important for their diurnal and seasonal variation in light intensity and duration. That is the photo period. They use it as a cue for timing of their foraging, reproduction and migratory activities. The availability of light on land is closely linked with that of the temperature, since sun is a source of both. For light and temperature, the source is same, that is sun. Deep, that is at depth greater than 500 meters in the ocean, the environment is perpetually dark and its inhabitants are not aware of the existence of celestial source of energy called sun. The UV component of the spectrum is harmful to many organisms, while not all color components of the visible spectrum are available for the marine plants living at different depth of the oceans. Moving on to the fourth important abiotic factor, soil. The nature and properties of soil in different places vary. It is depending on climate, weathering process, whether soil is transported or sedimentary, and how the development has occurred. So nature and property of the soil is very important when as a abiotic factor, and it depends on the climate. First point, the climate. The weathering process. Weathering is the process of formation, the breakdown of the rocks, which is a primary step in the soil formation. So weathering, climate, then whether the soil is transported or it's sedimentary, and how the soil development has occurred. The characteristic of soil, such as soil composition, grain size and aggregation, determine the percolation and water holding capacity of the soil. So percolation of the soil, percolation of the water through the soil, and water holding capacity, these are two important characteristics that determine the fauna, and the fauna thereby determining the flora and fauna of the area. So these are determined by the soil composition, grain size and aggregation. These characteristics, along with parameters such as pH, mineral composition and topography, determine to a large extent the vegetation of any area. This in turn dictates the type of animals that can be supported in the area. Okay, and in the aquatic environment, the sediment characteristic often determine type of benthic animals that can survive there. Benthic means the organism which live deep under the in the ocean floor, like in the deep under the sea. Now let's see the responses to the biotic factors by the abiotic factors. Having realized that the abiotic conditions of many habitats may vary drastically in time, we now ask How do the organisms living in such habitats cope or manage the stressful conditions? One would expect that during the course of millions of years of existence, many species would have evolved a relatively constant internal environment that permits all biochemical reactions and physiological function to proceed with maximal efficiency and thus enhance the overall fitness of the species. This constancy, for example, could be in terms of optimal temperature and osmotic concentration of body fluids. Ideally, then, the organism should try to maintain the constancy of its internal environment despite the varying external conditions that tend to upset its homeostasis. Now, let's see how the organism respond to the external environment. First category is conformers. For conformers, as the external environment changes, the internal environment also change accordingly. So the internal environments change with the external environment. Second case is regulators. For regulators, the internal environment remains constant despite change in the external conditions. So, however, there are a third category, that is partial regulators. For these category of organisms, initially they behave like conformers and then they behave like regulators. So initially their internal environment changes with the external environment and after a certain point they regulate it. The internal environment remains constant despite the changes in the external environment. So these are three categories. First one is conformers, second one is regulators, and third one is partial regulators. So for conformers, the internal environment changes with the external conditions. For regulators, internal environment remains constant despite changes in the external conditions. For partial regulators, they have characteristics of both. Initially, there is a change with the change in the internal environment with external environment, then the internal environment remain constant despite the changes in the external conditions. So now let's discuss one by one how the abiotic factors are dealt with by the biotic factors, how the organism respond to it. First way is to regulate. Some organisms are able to maintain homeostasis by physiological means which ensure constant body temperature, constant osmotic concentration, etc. All birds and mammals and a very few lower vertebrates and invertebrate species are indeed capable of such regulation, that is thermoregulation and osmoregulation. Thermoregulation is nothing but maintaining a constant body temperature and osmoregulation is the ability to maintain a constant osmotic concentration. Evolutionary biologists believe that success of mammals is largely due to their ability to maintain a constant body temperature and thrive whether they live in Antarctica or Sahara. So consider humans in Antarctica or Sahara will have a constant body temperature of around 37 degrees Celsius. So they have the ability to maintain a constant, they have the thermoregulation capacity to maintain a constant body temperature. The mechanism used by most mammals to regulate their body temperature is similar to the ones that is used by humans. We maintain a constant body temperature of 37 degrees Celsius. This is not 370, this is degree Celsius. Oh, here also this is degree Celsius. So we maintain a constant body temperature of 37 degrees Celsius. In summer, when the outside temperature, the outside environment is having more temperature than our body temperature, we sweat profusely and the resulting evaporative cooling will bring down the body temperature. In winter, when the temperature is much lower than the 37 degrees Celsius, that is our body temperature, we start to shiver. It's like a exercise which produces heat and raises the body temperature. So humans maintain the constant body temperature of 37 degrees Celsius by two ways. When the temperature is higher, we sweat, and that evaporative cooling will bring down the body temperature. And when the temperature is much lower, we shiver. It's like an exercise, and it produces heat and it raises the body temperature to the optimum level of 37 degrees Celsius. While in case of plants, if we see, they do not have any such mechanism to maintain a constant internal temperatures. Now the second way is conformation or conform. An overwhelmingly majority, that is 99% of animals and nearly all plants, they cannot maintain a constant internal environment. So 99% of animals and almost all plants cannot maintain a constant internal environment. Their body temperatures changes with the ambient temperatures. In aquatic animals, the osmotic concentration of the body fluids change with that of the ambient water osmotic concentration. These animals and plants are simply conformers. So for conformers, their internal conditions simply changes with the external conditions. They are known as the conformers. But considering the benefits of these constant and internal environment to the organism, we must ask why these conformers have not evolved to become regulators. The reason is thermoregulation is energetically expensive for many organisms. So thermoregulation is expensive for the organism, energetically very expensive. This particularly is true for small animals like shrews, hummingbirds, etc. So we have seen the Allen concept before that. For small animals and organisms, the energy regulation that is required, the energy expenses more. Heat loss or heat gain is a function of surface area. Small animals have a larger surface area relative to their volumes. So they tend to lose more heat fast when they are outside, in the cold. Then they have to expend more energy to generate body heat through metabolism. This is the main reason why small animals are rarely found in the polar areas. Like when we think of polar area, the first thing will come to our mind will be the snow leopards, the polar bears. All these are huge animals. So we rarely find small animals in the polar area. This is because of this important concept, that is heat loss as the function of surface area. So heat loss or heat gain. So when there is larger surface area, there is larger heat loss. Small animals have a larger surface area compared to their volume. So they tend to lose more energy when it is cold outside. That is the reason why we rarely find small animals in the polar regions. During the course of evolution, the cost and benefits of maintaining a constant internal environment are taken into consideration. Some species have evolved the ability to regulate, but only over a limited range of environmental conditions, beyond which they simply conform. If the stressful external conditions are localized or they remain only for a shorter duration, then the organism have two alternatives. So when the stressful external condition is remain for a small period, or it is or if it is localized, then we have two alternatives, then the organism. First one is migrate. The organism temporarily move away from the stressful habitat to a more hospitable area. So these are the keywords. This is a temporary way to escape. So they temporarily move away from the stressful habitat and to a more hospitable area, and they return back when the stressful period is over. Many animals, particularly birds, during winter undertake long distance migration to more hospitable areas. Every winter, the famous Kialado National Park in Bharatpur National Park in Rajasthan hosts thousands of migratory birds coming from Siberia or the polar region. Another way is suspect. In bacteria, fungi, or small plants or lower plants, various kinds of thick-walled spores are formed which help them to survive the unfavorable conditions, and these germinate back when the suitable environment arrives. In higher plants, seeds and some other vegetative reproductive structures serve as means to tide over periods of stress. Besides helping in dispersal, they germinate to form new plants under favorable moisture and temperature conditions. In animals, the organism, if unable to migrate, they might avoid the stress by escaping the time. So, animals have another way, they avoid the stressful condition by escaping the time. Now, let's see the examples. The familiar case is bears. These undergo hibernation during winter to escape the stressful time. So, bears undergo hibernation. Some snails and fish undergo estivation to avoid summer related issues like heat, desiccation, etc. Under unfavorable conditions, zooplanktons, which is found in lakes and ponds, are known to enter a state of diapause, a stage of suspended development. So, these are all examples of how the... Okay, now moving on to the next topic, adaptations. While considering the various alternatives available to organisms for coping with the extremes in their environment, we have seen that some are able to respond through certain physiological adjustments while others do it behaviorally. These responses are also actually their adaptations. So, organisms respond physiologically or some respond behaviorally to cope up with the extremes in their environment. So, these responses are called adaptations. Adaptation is any attribute of the organism, be it morphological, physiological, behavioral, that enables the organism to survive and reproduce in its habitat. Many adaptations have evolved over long evolutionary time and are genetically fixed. So, over a long period of time, these adaptations have become genetically fixed. In absence of, we'll take an example, in absence of external source of water, the kangaroo rat in the North American desert is capable of meeting all its water requirements through internal fat oxidation, in which the water is the byproduct. And it also has another ability to concentrate its urine so that the minimal water is lost as urine, and the removal of excretory products is also done. So, kangaroo rat in the North American desert, it's able to meet its water requirement through internal fat oxidation, and they also have another ability to concentrate its urine so that the minimal water wastage, minimal water loss is there. And plants, the desert plants have a thick cuticle on their leaf surfaces and have their stomata arranged in the deep pits to minimize water through transpiration. They also have special photosynthetic pathway to enable that enables their stomata to remain closed during daytime. Some plants like desert plants like Opuntia have no leaves. They are reduced to spines, and the photosynthetic function is taken over by the flattened stems. So, we have seen adaptation of a desert animal, that is kangaroo rat of North American desert. Now, when we consider desert plants, they have many adaptations. One is they have thick cuticle on their leaf surface, which will prevent the water loss. And second, their sunken stomata, which will reduce and minimize the water loss through transpiration. And they also have special photosynthetic pathways that enables the sunken stomata to remain closed during the daytime. And another example of desert plant is Opuntia, which have no leaves. Their leaves are reduced to spines so that water loss to the transpiration is avoided, and their photosynthetic function is taken over by the flattened green stem. Now, mammals from colder climates generally have shorter ears and limbs to minimize heat loss. This is called Allen's rule. In polar areas, aquatic mammals like seals have thick layer of fat below the skin so that it acts as insulator and reduces loss of body heat. So mammals in colder areas have shorter ears and limbs. This is closely related to the concept that we have seen, that is the heat loss and surface area. Heat loss and surface area. Heat loss is a function of surface area. When the surface area increases, the heat loss will also increase. So that is the reason why in colder areas they have shorter ears and limbs, thereby reducing the surface area. When the surface area is reduced, the mammals will have lesser heat loss. This is Allen's rule. Very important concept. Just take a note of it. Allen's rule. And in another adaptation for the animals in cold areas is a thick layer of fat that will act as an insulator and also reduces the loss of heat. Adaptations that are physiological, which allow them to respond quickly to a stressful situation. If you have ever been to any high altitude place like Rohtang Pass or Mansarovar, which is at an altitude greater than 3,500 meters, you might have experienced what is called altitude sickness. Its symptoms include nausea, fatigue, and heart palpitations. This is because in the low atmospheric pressure of the high altitudes, the body does not get enough oxygen. So we'll get altitude sickness. But gradually we get acclimatized and stop experiencing that altitude sickness. The body compensates low oxygen availability by increasing the RBC production, red blood cells production, decreasing the binding capacity of the hemoglobin, and by increasing the breathing rate. So the altitude sickness is fought by the body by three ways. One is by increasing the RBC production, then it decreases the binding capacity of the hemoglobin, and our breathing rates also increase. Many tribes there are many tribes that lives in the high altitude areas of Himalayas. For these people, they have if they are normally have a they already normally have a higher RBC count than the people living in the plain. So that is why we see when people go for mountaineering in mountaineering high altitudes and mainly the great Himalayas, when they go, the Sherpas, the guide or the Sherpas, these are the local tribes. These people often doesn't require the oxygen mask. And some organisms show behavioral response to cope up with variations in the environment. For example, desert lizards lack the physiological ability that mammals have to deal with the high temperature of their habitat, but manage to keep their body temperature fairly constant by behavioral means. So first what we have seen is the physiological means by which the organism try to maintain a constant temperature. And now we'll see how the organisms like a desert lizard, which do not have the physiological ability, but they maintain a fairly constant body temperature by behavioral means. They bask in sun and absorb heat when their body temperature drops below the comfort zone, but they move to shade when the ambient temperatures start increasing. So once if they start feeling cold or when their body temperature drop, they will bask in the sun, and when the temperatures start rising above their ambient or convenient body temperature, they will move to the shade. Some species are capable of burrowing into the soil to hide and escape from the above ground heat. So these are various methods or adaptations by which the organism try to maintain a constant body temperature and body conditions. We will end the discussion here. This is part 1 of chapter 13, Organism and Population. Part 2 of this chapter will be discussed in the next class from population onwards. Thank you for watching. For more related contents, do like, share and subscribe.